Annie Griffiths creates beautiful photographs, and she tells important stories along the way. She's one of the first women ever to photograph for National Geographic. She's photographed in nearly 150 countries during her long and storied career. In addition to her magazine work, though, she's deeply committed to photographing for aid organizations around the world. And this is going to be one of the themes that she's going to talk about today. She's the executive director of Ripple Effect Images, a collective of photographers who document the programs that are empowering women, just like Vanessa's program does, women and girls throughout the developing world. Her work has appeared in Life, Geo, Smithsonian, Fortune, Stern, and many other publications. And welcome to our anchor woman, Annie Griffiths.
Hello. Is this on? Oh. And thank you for staying. I know it's been a long day, and I'm honored to wrap things up with the work of my life. You won't believe it, but Vanessa and I literally just met before she went on, and it will seem like I paid her to set up this talk for me because everything that Vanessa said is part of the work that I've observed for my nonprofit, which is called Ripple Effect Images. And then she said Ripple Effect like 10 times. So, but I have had an extraordinary career, so very lucky. And one of the unintended consequences of being one of the first women photographers at National Geographic was that there were so many underreported or unreported stories about women and girls. And so I saw it as an enormous opportunity. And I love the title of this conference, Imagine Solutions, because I think we have a solution. I think we have the best solution, the best investment the world can make in our shared future. And that investment is in women and girls globally. I've been lucky enough to work in 150 countries, and I've seen it over and over again, exactly what Vanessa was talking about. That if you take it to the girls in small areas and large, and you give them just a little bit of encouragement or empowerment, they change the world. And they go around problems, and they work together. So I'm going to first start introducing you to my inspiration. This is my mom. And my mom, this was taken by my dad on their first date. But my mom was, Midwestern, Catholic, suburban, like such a good girl, such a nice girl. And she had a lot of obstacles in the first world way that we see obstacles. But she knew how to go around them. And one of the things that Mom did that'll give you an example of how she goes around a problem. She was born the day that Charles Lindbergh flew the Atlantic, and she always was fascinated with flight. And so she wanted to be a flight attendant. And this was back in the olden days when there were a few rules. And Mom was as blind as I am and as all the girls in my family are. And so they took one look at her and said, no, you really don't even need to apply because, you got glasses. And I mean, imagine the safety risk in turbulence. They could go flying off your face. And so my mom said, okay, well, thank you very much. And she became a pilot. So that's, her competence and her ability to just go, oops, well, let's see now. What shall I do? I've seen echoed all over the world. An example of that, I was doing a story on Jerusalem for the magazine, and it's really hard for a journalist to work in Israel because there are so many rules, religious rules, political rules, just security rules. And this is a picture of between 200,000 and 300,000 Muslims praying around the Dome of the Rock and facing Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is the second holiest place in Islam. It was shot from a helicopter. The only way I got permission at all was to go up with an Army helicopter and shoot from 3,000 feet up. But it was kind of a blessing. But what I really wanted is that I knew on this was the last Friday of Ramadan, and on the next morning, the women gather inside the Dome of the Rock to welcome the end of the fast as the sun rises through the window, and that's the end of the fast. So I asked everybody and their mother-in-law for permission, and nobody was budging on it. And so finally, the last day, I went to the home of the Grand Mufti, and I went to his home, and he was busy seeing important men, but I heard voices in the kitchen, so I wandered in, and his wife and his daughters were making dinner, and so I just fit right in and chopped salad and helped them make dinner, and they were delightful and educated and wonderful, and they invited me to dinner. Yes. And and then the rest of the family came in, and we sat down and had this absolutely delightful dinner. And I waited until the end of the meal, and then I turned to the Mufti and I said, "May I please have your permission to be with the women as they welcome the end of the fast tomorrow at the Dome?" And he said, "No, you can't." And so I was like, oh, it was my last chance. I went back to my apartment feeling really discouraged. About 5 o'clock in the morning, there was this little knock at my apartment door, and I opened it, and there was a young woman. And she said, "Dress modestly and bring one camera." Because the Grand Mufti said no, but his wife said yes. And, it was, once you're in, you're in. So much of trying to tell an important story is getting to the truth, getting to the place. And it was just beautiful. Once I was in, I just kind of snuggled down with all the girls and waited for this picture, which is the moment the sun rose and came through the window to end the fast. It is part of this extraordinary privilege I've had of being with women in all these different countries. And what I've learned is that the Western world tends to pity them, and we should be applauding them. This is one of my early trips. I was literally 25 years old. I look like a bug. And I'm with women who'd never seen a Caucasian woman before. Now, they lived in a very remote part of Namibia, and they were also living through 7 years of drought. And everybody in this room would have died. But these women had unbelievable knowledge and resourcefulness, and they were able to find enough to feed their kids, enough to survive in this desert. It is absolutely beautiful, and it's absolutely brutal. It's called the Skeleton Coast for a reason. And yet, for a woman to face this and be able to find lunch, moisture, a life, I learned so much on this early trip. And as time went on, I started working with aid organizations also, in addition to my work for Geographic. And time and again, I saw that the key to turning a village around, or a state around, or a country around, were the women. This is in Rwanda. And I saw that if you disenfranchise 50% of your population, you cannot possibly find great success. This is in Haiti. And we so misunderstand women and girls in the developing world. And to a great extent, I blame the media, my own gang, because increasingly we only hear a couple of things about them. One, that that they're victims of conflict, very important, and then almost all the other coverage is about their sexual vulnerability. And those things are important, but that is not an accurate representation of who these women are. And so I just decided I need to show how cool these women are, how strong, how funny, how intelligent, how resourceful they are, and that if we could just invest in women and girls, things would change so much faster. The data shows that every aid dollar invested in a program for women and kids pays back at 3 times the rate of aid programs that are invested in men and boys. And yet, 2 cents out of every American aid dollar goes to women and girls. That's just really bad math. And I was starting to get kind of angry and distressed, and then I realized, well, don't whine about it, do something about it. But there was a day when I almost quit, and it was this day. I was in a refugee camp, and I've been in a lot of refugee camps, but this was a horrible refugee camp. And I met this young Somali mother, and she was just so lovely and kind, and her baby was sick, and I just thought, she's never getting out of here. I had such a crisis of confidence. I just went, what am I doing? And I think everybody in this room has probably felt that at different times, that it's like so big, it's so overwhelming, it's, where do you start? But I took this picture, and it was used by the aid organization to raise funding. And 2 years later, I was in a refugee coordinator's office in Richmond, Virginia, and this was hanging on the wall. And I said, wow, that looks familiar, and meaning I'd taken the picture. And the refugee coordinator turned to me and said, oh yeah, and she's doing great. She's working at Walmart, her husband's working at Kentucky Fried Chicken, the baby's fine. And it was just this epiphany of like, don't ever, ever give up. And I'm very clear that I did not get her out of the refugee camp. I take pictures, I tell stories. But if those pictures and those stories can help raise attention and funding for these vital programs, then that's what I want to do for the rest of my life. So I called my girlfriends at National Geographic, who were also doing aid work. There was a core group of women who were just, they so got it, and they were so talented, but even more importantly, such good humanitarians. And I said, we all know that women work together, and that's how they get more done. We're biologically programmed that way. And I said, so how about if we photographers work together? And they all said yes, and we started Ripple Effect Images. And what we do is we identify success. We identify solutions. And I raised the funding to send a team in, a videographer and a still photographer, to document that success, to document those programs. And Vanessa was talking about Wangari Maathai. We documented her program in Kenya. And then we provide we make a film and access to those images to the aid organization. And to date, in 5 years, our aid partners have reported raising over $10 million using those assets. And so we focus on, I know, isn't that cool? It's the ripple effect. And here's what we focus on. We focus on water, because it's an incredible crippler of poor women. Women and girls usually have to walk great distances to get really bad water. In fact, we covered a program where women and girls were walking 11 hours a day to get terrible water. And once they were taught, I mean, they want to do the work, they just need a little engineering and a little cement, and they'll do the rest. And they started building sand dams, and of course, the girls then got to go to school. This is in Cambodia, and these kids are just like my kids, you know. It was the first time they'd seen water come out of the ground, fresh water. And so, of course, they just jumped in and had fun. And another thing that we don't think about with water is if you're a mule who hauls water from great distances so that you can keep your kids alive, you would never use that water to bathe. And think what that means to a woman, to feel that she's never even clean. So helping solve those water problems, helping involve local women in managing those solutions leads to an incredible morale boost, an incredible self-esteem for them. And then they always go on to do something else. Always. They're unstoppable. Most people don't realize that women in some regions are 90% of the field laborers. A lot of times they can't even own the land, and they are very limited on being able to market their product. So a middleman comes in and takes their product and pays them very little, and they don't have any ownership. And programs that educate women farmers and really help them understand, especially in a changing climate, what to feed your animals, what to, how to see if they're growing properly, that it's healthier for your kids if you plant beans and vegetables instead of just one monoculture of rice or corn. You tell women that, and they will do it. We're talking about their kids. And health. We had a wonderful presentation earlier today about health and the remote communities that are often cut off from any health information. Some of the most effective programs I've seen are simply where locally trained health workers go, and they already have the trust of women from their culture, and they bring them information. And if they're trained even further, they can bring the penicillin. They can bring the medicine for the tuberculosis. They will be trusted, and they will become not only entrepreneurs in their regions, but they will also become leaders, trusted leaders. And one of the basic things that I have learned about cultures that don't value women, at times including our own, is that if you want a culture to value women, you show how valuable they are. It's really, really the only way to change hearts and minds. This is in a very remote part of Vietnam. These women didn't know what a germ was. Nobody had ever told them that if they could wash their babies' faces and hands and keep them clean, they'd have far less illness and far less death. And I love the intensity of these women once they've learned something, how they're so focused on doing it. The most underreported story I have ever come across in my life is the #1 killer of women and of kids under 5 in the developing world. And sadly, I'm guessing a lot of you don't know what it is. It kills more people than malaria, AIDS, and tuberculosis combined. And it's household air pollution. And these are World Health Organization numbers. And one of the saddest things is, first of all, people don't know, because I really do believe if people know, they really care and they get involved. But it's preventable. It's completely preventable if we can focus on it as a global health disaster. Now, I'm sure some of you have heard about that cook stove issue. That's part of it, and an important part of it. But it is a global health disaster that's going to require the medical community, the nonprofit community, the governments, and the environmental community to push hard to change this, because the solutions we have them. It's just a matter of scaling them. Here's a clean cook stove. This woman is clean. Her kids are clean. It uses 1/10 the amount of fuel that her previous stove did. And it's one of the solutions. I was in India covering the salt workers, and it takes an unbelievable toll on their little bodies, and most of them are young girls who do this work. And it's really brutal, and they're out in the hot sun all day long. But at the end of the day, this little girl had a solar lantern. I hadn't seen it, but she went over to get it, and I started talking to her about oh, that's great, you've got a solar lantern, which, we really underestimate what that means in the lives of families who have to live by the sun. Or they have toxic kerosene lamps or candles. 300,000 people die every year because of household fires in the developing world caused by these unhealthy cooking things. But the thing that's going to get her out of the salt mines is this lantern. Because she told me that she charged it all day so that she could go to school at night. And I did some research, and 70,000 children in her region are now going to school because of solar lanterns. And that is the ticket out. Education and equity in education is, the impact is incredible. Girls who get a secondary education marry an average of 4 years later. They have 3 fewer children. They can find productive work. They're less likely to put up with abuse, and their children will go to school. It's the ripple effect. And boy, do they want it. In fact, my kids would cringe when I come home from these aid trips because I go, what do you mean you don't want to do your homework? Do you know how lucky you are? But it's everywhere, and it is happening. Literacy is up. It works. These programs work. We just have to be sure to commit to them. This is a very traditional Bedouin family, but the girls go to school, so they had this little iPad. I couldn't believe it. Bolivia, it's everywhere. This woman is the poorest woman I ever met in my life. And I say that because she had lost 7 children to malnutrition. It just doesn't get worse than that. And she got a little microfinance loan, $25. And with that, she started a little food business by the side of the road. And she was getting it kind of coming along. She was doing pretty well. And then she saw a 2-year-old little girl, this girl on the right, walking down the road naked and orphaned. And so she took her in. And she was worried that the baby needed milk. So she took some of her savings and bought a goat to get goat's milk. And then she started breeding the goats. So then she had 2 businesses. She had the food by the side of the road, and she had her little goat business. And she saved enough to send her daughter to school. That was her first priority. And so this little girl was now going to school and getting her education. And I was about to leave. I had spent some lovely time with him, and I was about to leave, and the little girl ran up to me, and she asked if she could see my notebook and pen. And so I handed them to her, and she brought them over to her mom to show me that she had taught her mother to read and write. That's the ripple effect. And women who haven't had the extraordinary privilege of an education can still be taught to do great things. It doesn't mean they're not smart. They're just unlucky. So this woman has just finished building 50 solar lanterns. She comes from a village where there's never been any artificial light. And she's taking her final exam. They give her a broken one, and they see if she can figure out what's wrong with it and fix it. And if she passes the exam, she gets to take all 50 lanterns back to her village, along with the parts to build 50 more by women. Now watch her. She passed. She passed. But look at her body language when she goes back to her village with the lanterns. I mean, look at that pride and that hope and that belief in herself. And then look at the girlfriends. They all got a bottle of light. You know, it's so possible. It's so possible. This woman had never had a day of education, but she was trained to run a solar desalination plant. She's now a hero, not just in her home, but in her entire community. I'm going to finish in Pakistan, where I had a beautiful experience. And I have these experiences regularly, but I'm always blown away. I went to a very, very remote area. Oh, excuse me. First, I'm sorry, I'm ahead of myself. Women farmers are now being brought into cooperative units. And instead of having a middleman, they bring their crops in. This is so cool. And so this is the farmer in the flowered sari, and on the left is the woman who runs the co-op, and the women have been sorting her crop and weighing it. And so she's watching to see how much it weighed and what the cost was. Okay, and then, meanwhile, out back is the commodities broker, and she's on her cell phone. Remember earlier today we heard about more people have cell phones than have clean water. They are a vital part of communities lifting themselves, especially women. So she calls down to the market, finds out what the going cost of that crop is, undersells it by a couple rupees, comes back in, and voila! These women will never go back. They have been empowered. And that's what I believe is going to change the world. So I'm sorry, now we are in Pakistan. But we're in the middle of nowhere, miles from any road, and we ended up in this little village. And we knew we were going to sleep in the desert that night. We didn't know where, but they realized it too, and they asked if we'd like to stay in their village. And this is what their village looked like. And we said, thank you very much. And with that, they brought us soup. And they brought out their 2 best cots and their best blankets. And they put the cots in the middle of the little huts. And we ate our soup in our cots with all the kids on the cots with us watching every bite. And at one point, one of the women asked if we would like music because it was getting late and we all needed to go to sleep. And we said we would love music. And with that, 5 or 6 elderly men made a little circle around our cots and played until we fell asleep. And I promise you, none of these people had ever heard of National Geographic. And it confirmed what my mother taught me from the time I was a little kid, that people who have nothing give everything. And I just believe that we who have everything have to give back. Thank you very much.